I'll start by saying that I'm Tim Keelan. I'm with Hannah Keelan Associates. We are hired by the Greater Fremont Development to do an updated and new Dodge County housing study. We completed one about 4 years ago, and since that time it's been well received, and there's a lot of activities that relates to housing development in the county, almost every community. We're about 2/3 of the way through the study. We've conducted a variety of research efforts and crunching numbers and determining a preliminary target and potential housing demand for each one of the communities as well as the county-wide. Conducted a couple of new types of surveys. We did one with major employers to get their take on housing and what their employees needed. And we also did a survey to housing stakeholders, organizations that are involved in some capacity, be they profit or nonprofit organizations, in doing housing in the communities. And we've received a lot of good input. We've got a housing steering committee that we've met with, I think 3 times, going to meet with them a 4th time next week. And it's made up of about 12 or 13 folks that give us a lot of good feedback in regards to what the housing demand is, and represented pretty much by every one of the communities. We're here this evening to talk about North Bend specifically. And I have a lot of good news for the community in the sense that you're doing very well as it relates to population. You have population growth in your community. That's the good news, and that will continue over the next 5 years. The housing study is for 5 years. That's how we look at that, kind of a window of 5 years. So you've had population gain since the 2010 census. And we currently have you at around 1,300 folks. And so you're doing very well. And I think you do have the potential to get anywhere from like 1,325 to 1,400 folks over the next 5 years, depending upon what type of position that you take in regards to doing new housing. You know, it takes planning, it takes a lot of housing initiatives to get things going. Not only the purchase and rehab and resell of houses or re-renting of houses, but also the construction of new housing as well. So the good news is your population is growing. Your number of households are growing. That's the good news. Not such good news, you don't have a lot of housing. You have less than a 5% vacancy in the community. That's just not good enough. And most communities with your kind of growth that's occurring, you need to look at anywhere from about 6.5% to 7% vacancy. Now, I know nobody wants to own and set on a vacant unit, but that's just the nature of housing economics, that you have to have housing units available for the opportunity for folks not only coming to your community to live, but also for folks that want to change housing over the next 5 years. They want to switch out and create new housing. So you don't have a lot to go around at this particular point. So that's one of the things to consider when we take a look at both a target as well as a potential demand for the community. Also, to get you thinking a little bit here for this evening, we do have some preliminary housing demands that we've put together. This is all preliminary. It's still a work in progress. But for North Bend, for example, we've proposed anywhere from 28 to 59 housing units. Okay, that includes both owner units and renter units. The 59% is the total potential. That's kind of the ceiling that we look at for communities. The floor level is around 28. And so we will be asking you at this particular point to put together the planning initiatives that are necessary. We're working with economic development, working with local lenders, local builders and such, to try to get to anywhere between that 28 to 59 units. And that's a pretty even split between, I think we have you at 36 for that total 59. We have you at 36 owner units and around 23 rental units. Not all of those will be able to be new construction. You'll need to have what we refer to as a housing initiative in the community, which takes a look at the purchase of vacant units and either taking them out, tearing them down and building new housing units, and or the rehabilitation of those units for the resale or the re-rent of the units themselves. So the good news is your population's growing. uh, it's not a bad news, but you don't have a lot of units available because of your growth. You just don't have a lot of units of different price points and different types. And the good news again is that you have a nice range of housing demand from anywhere from like 28 to 59 units. And that's kind of where we're at right now. What Kelly and I would like to hear from you folks this evening, you know, for the next 45 minutes or so, is to kind of school us on what you feel the housing, both the current housing needs are, as well as the future housing needs over the next 5 years. And that can include the conversation of new construction. It can include the conversation of housing rehabilitation. It can include talking about housing for families, any particular special population group like teachers or whatever the case may be. It can include housing for the senior citizens. We always want to look out for our senior citizens. We want to make sure that they stay in Dodge County and retire there and stay there. And so there's a number of, we'll just entertain any kind of comments that you have about what that current housing need is and what you feel the future need is over the next 5 years. And be as specific or as general as you so desire. So Kelly, I'm going to kind of turn it over to the group. And if you have to call on them, you'll have to call on them, because I want to hear folks. I want your opinion, because we'll put this information into the study itself. And once the study is completed, Kelly will put it on the website, and it will be a piece for implementation. Like I said, the last study we did has created a ton of interest in new housing developments. So go ahead, folks.
The floor is yours. Go ahead.
Okay. My name is Tom Wolf. I'm chairman of the Platte Valley Bank here in town. I'd like your impression of North Bend. I assume you've driven around town. When you talked about rehabilitation of units, it seems like we've got a number of pretty shabby looking properties. I don't know what we can do about it,
Well,
but
okay, go ahead.
your thoughts on that. And then secondly, I agree with you 100% trying to keep, you know, some of our elderly citizens maybe move off the farm and would build or live in town here as well.
Say the second one again. You kind of blurped in and out on me a little bit.
I was just mentioning the fact that it'd be great to be able to have some property that our senior citizens, our older farmers would maybe move to North Bend rather than moving to Fremont.
Okay, I'll address those. First of all, I know your town very, very well. My business partner's grandmother, and well, her mother was from there, and I used to visit there a lot, her grandmother. And I've been to your old settlers function several times, maybe like 10 or 12, I think, or something like that. I'm guessing you probably didn't do it this year. So I know the town very well, and we've looked at all the properties in the community. We have some information in regards to the condition of housing units. We checked the condition of housing units against those of the assessor. And like every town, you have housing that needs fixed up. It's tired out. It's not pulling its own weight in regards to its taxing and so on and so forth. And so in the housing study itself, we will identify, you know, some target number for just housing rehab. Just housing rehab. That's housing that's occupied, and be they families or, you know, of senior citizens, whatever the case may be, we'll identify a certain number. We haven't really got to that point, but we'll identify a certain number of units for housing rehab. But I'm glad you bring up the topic, because there is the ability for your community to create like a housing rehab program. And when I went into this business many years ago, there wasn't the funding sources that there are today. And there's a multitude of funding sources available that communities can tap into to have a bucket of money, you know, for housing rehabilitation. The senior housing is something I want to see every community talk about. Today I've been working on a project for Lexington, which is around 56 townhomes. because it was brought to our attention that the community had some folks at 65 plus who wanted not to live in their house anymore. They want a townhome. And so we're seeing that over and over. I talked to the mayor in Waverly the other day about it. And so bringing up that is perfect timing as well. And I'll write down here elderly housing. And so some of that demand that I talked about earlier will definitely set aside for the senior citizens. And I know do you still have your nursing home there? I think you do.
No,
Got taken out by the flood.
That's too bad. I didn't know that. Okay. All right. What's your plans for that?
It's already been torn down, and the school has bought the property, which is adjacent to it. So it
Okay.
no longer exists and no longer has the potential to exist.
Oftentimes a community your size may want to get out of the long-term care business and concentrate more on if you wanted to do a smaller assisted living program or something like that. And because today assisted living has about 9 levels of assisted living as opposed to just 1 or 2. And so we're seeing a lot of communities concentrate on doing some assisted living units along with some independent living units, that type of thing. And so we'll throw out some of those concepts to the community, as well as just apartments or townhomes. You've got a lot of farm families around there, and you mentioned, the retirement of them and coming to the community and making a permanent residence in the community, but living in something that they don't have to mow the lawn anymore, and in some kind of HOA or something of that nature. That's getting more and more common for communities your size. So.
So I'm Bob Fuhr, retired teacher, and I'm on the school board now. What about getting a developer interested in our community? How do we go about selling North Bend? I mean, I'm a believer that with the bypass, well, I think it's going to be completed before I die. I'm not so sure about that anymore, but we're going to be really close to Omaha. We really have the potential, I think, to really turn into, a go-to community. We've got good parks, we have golf course, good schools. We still have a lot of amenities for, as close as we are to Lincoln and Omaha for community size. How do we get a developer interested in North Bend and what we have to offer and can see into the future with us, to see what the community is going to turn into?
When we finish the housing study, we will scatter it all about and, make sure that there's a number of both public and private entities that see it. I know a lot of housing developers just simply because of the work that I'm in, the job that I have. Kelly has gotten a lot of great experience, over the last 3 or 4 years with these developers knocking on her door, wanting to do different projects. What I would do is when the housing study is completed, and in that housing study, we'll identify some different parcels of land in your community that are available for different types of housing, be it single family, median income, be it senior housing, townhomes, or whatever the case may be. We'll identify some land areas. The first thing that attracts a developer to your community is that you have land available. And it's always important that that land, of course, has the necessary infrastructure to it. And if it doesn't have the infrastructure, that's a cost that has to be that's something that just needs to be taken care of before you just, can market your communities, to have a piece of dirt and include with that modern utilities, streets, water, sewer, that type of thing. So that's something as a community you need to think about. I would suggest once the study is done that you have, that you establish your own housing committee in the community itself, of 7 individuals that are really gung-ho on putting housing in the community, from different trades like the school, banks, etc., and work together and find yourself a developer. And I can provide you names of developers. Developers will go where they can make a profit and where you make it reasonably easy for them. Okay. That's just the nature of them. We're all a little bit that way. It's like, they want to know that they're going to come to a community and that community has a piece of dirt that's available for some particular housing project, that you're willing to take a look at different funding sources, like, I'm going to name some things here like home funds or housing trust funds or tax increment financing, things of this nature, to help buy down the cost on any housing, anywhere from 15 to 25 to 30%. And that makes it affordable to the folks in your community, as well as it provides them with a reasonable profit to do projects. Because what you're talking about is getting a developer who may be first and foremost interested in Fremont to work in North Bend. And the trick there is make it easier for him or her, whatever the case may be. And don't make it complicated. Invite them in, tell them what you want, tell them what you're willing to provide as a community, and get the project going. So it's all about implementing the housing study. But I would start with like a committee and have your own committee, your own housing committee, local North Bend housing committee, and to take the housing study. And I'm always available, to call me or whatever, or something like that, or one of the guys in the office, and talk to us about, what's kind of a next step. We do that a lot in communities. And I know when we finished it last time, there was a lot of interest in Fremont, And, the question is, why can't they just be as interested, in one of the smaller communities in the county, which I think they should be. Scribner does a fairly good job. You just have to sort of put yourself out there to kind of a courtship with some developer. So that's a long answer to your question, but that's kind of how that works.
Thank you. My name is Alec Legg. I'm a city councilman in North Bend. And I've really looked at this for a long time. I was a councilman maybe a dozen years ago as well. And, there are many houses that are certainly would qualify for rejuvenating. There's certainly houses a few that we have that could just come down. We have no lots in town. We're out of lots for new construction, basically. Some of the challenges North Bend has is we've had some city fathers and councils in the past have vacated so many of the streets that would leave town or go through, so when those streets come to the end of town, for those property owners, they vacated those streets. So those streets no longer go through, and a lot of those streets that's happened. So that does create some challenges in looking at areas of development, just for the simple fact you may have one way in and out of some of those areas. We have, I've talked to the council about it here. We've actually, the last 3 council meetings have had some good conversation about it. And I've actually taken past council members around and past mayors around and looked at different ideas. There has been an area located that a person could, potentially develop like 9 square blocks with the streets that would go through. There's an area where there is 3 streets that you could get through, with the 4th street already paved on the east side, and there is some potential there. I could tell you that yes, the city is interested, at least from what I get out of the council, and starting to look at what we can do to expand our tax base, and be able, and hopefully in the future be able to provide some more, better amenities for the taxpayers of town. And although I don't see any big industries coming to North Bend, certainly as our population grows, there'll be more service businesses that would open up, and that's good. That's good too.
Yep.
I can tell you that, you know, and Mr. Bosco is listening in, I believe. He's a councilman as well. And I'm sure he would reaffirm what I said as far as the interest of the council and looking at every means necessary to try to get something going for sure.
I was kind of involved with housing when housing wasn't popular, you know, back in the 80s, late 80s and early 90s. And there was always, you know, you have to have the city council behind it. And it has to be, you know, one of the goals of the city council to increase housing stock in the community, improve housing stock. And in that effort, increase the property tax values. And when you do that, it's helpful to the schools and, you know, all the other public entities and so on and so forth. But you make some good points. And I think that now is the time to start thinking about exactly where you can do a project, making sure that, you know, you have the whole city council on board, which I think is excellent. So I took some notes down here. Yeah. I've worked with city councils that didn't care about housing until you talk about property values, you know, getting more taxes for different entities, and then they're supportive of it. But that's kind of in the past. And so now city councils understand that there's an opportunity. You need to take a look at North Bend and say, you know, what do you have to offer? To me, it's a very accessible community. You can come in from it from a multitude of directions. I've driven through it, I don't know how many times going someplace else, and stopped there and just going east to west and north to south and so on and so forth. So it's an excellent location. It's an excellent location, and the town's laid out well. You have a nice little downtown. You have neighborhoods, very specific neighborhoods and things. You have a nice park area. There's a lot of reasons to want to live there. And it's a good sized population. If you get up around that 1,400, that's attractive to younger families that may work in Fremont and are one of the bigger areas, or even Omaha. And so you got to start thinking about how to market yourself as well. And maybe you've already done that, but if you're going to market yourself, you have to have something to market. And what you want to market is housing, you know, the redevelopment of existing housing or the construction of new housing.
Tim, this is Nathan Arneal. I'm the president of the Chamber of Commerce and chair of the Economic Development Committee locally, and also the editor of the local newspaper.
Okay.
That role, and this is kind of anecdotal, but in that role, I always get people calling, well, do you know of any houses available? Well, you know, if we did, they would be listed in the real estate section of our paper.
Mm-hmm.
And I can know just within the last few years, I can reel off several examples of young families, upper 20s, early 30s, young children. Some of them don't even have a previous connection to North Bend, but identify our community. Maybe someone has a job nearby, who want to move to North Bend just for the reasons you listed, our proximity to Fremont, Omaha, and Lincoln, our great school system, a lot of things going for it, but they just can't find a place. And they end up in Wahoo or somewhere else outside of town. I think the demand, and those are just the kind of people you want moving to a community. We're going to raise families, and be productive members of our community. They're going to shop in our stores, going to pay taxes, they're going to send their kids to our schools, all that. But space is an issue. And a lot of times it's finding that kind of that, I don't know what the right word, medium level starter type of home. And then also when they get done that starter type of home, they want something a little nicer. And there you just have to get lucky and hope that someone moves into nursing home or moves out of town or dies or whatever, so you can get a nice house in town. And you mentioned it starts with land, and that's kind of our issue. We are kind of landlocked by farm ground. We do have, I believe, a plot of like 7 acres that is, I believe it's still for sale adjacent to town here. And the plot Alex talked about, which is a great location, is currently being owned and farmed. So we would have to approach that farmer to see if he's even interested in selling us a few acres for that expansion, that housing development. So those are some of the issues. Like I said, I think that the demand is there. If we had a housing development with the 8 new homes, I think we could get rid of them lickety split. If we had that land available and the developer interested.
Speaking from City Hall, we get a call every week to City Hall for somebody looking for a lot, build a house. Every week, I get a daily log of all communication that goes through City Hall, and I get that every day. And once a week on that daily log, somewhere in those 5 days, somebody will have called looking for a lot to build in North Bend. And that's been going on for a while. I'm afraid we probably are a little behind the curve, and we need to play some catch up.
Do you know how many dilapidated homes you have in North Bend?
I couldn't give you that. Bart, who's listening in, might have a better, he's on our Board of Health, and actually just lately they've been doing a tour of town, and we've been making a big effort on some of these places to get them cleaned up.
Mm-hmm.
And so he might have a better idea of that
Okay.
than I can. We actually have some that could just, you can come down,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Can you hear me on this?
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
Mark, go ahead.
I would be willing to bet there's probably 6 to 10 homes that should either have a complete remodel or, maybe 3 or 4 of those should be removed. The problem with that is you have a home in between 2 others and you have to build it up to floodplain. That doesn't always work, raising it that distance. Some of those dilapidated homes are still owned by someone and being rented, and there's always people willing to rent a house for $400 a month that, the owner might have $20,000 invested in it. So the only way to get around that is for somebody to be able to come in and buy those, or the city to get on them and make them fix them up. I don't know what are the rules on that. We've been working on cleaning the town up, but there's a lot of just highly dilapidated stuff that they don't want to do anything with.
County assessor has you down for probably, she uses different categories here, and we've driven through and we kind of did a check and balance on it. Got you down for at least about 16 bad houses. Let's call them bad, okay? And, that need to be addressed in some capacity, primarily maybe just to sort of leave this earthly plane, and make those lots available. And I have to be honest with you, the way that's done, it's always kind of like, the answer is money. What's the question? What is done in a lot of communities your size is you'll see an investment club of about 10 people that'll pool their dollars and buy these up and clear them off, and make the lots available for some single family homes, duplexes, whatever the case may be. So I'm seeing more and more of that all the time. And the city might have a little bit of money in that pot, but oftentimes it's just local individuals, that community leaders that have some dollars to do that. And if they get their money back someday, that's okay too, but it's like, fact of the matter is oftentimes they're business owners. And so they figure, well, they're just going to have the better business when they get more houses. And so they, they're futuristic about it. They're long-term thinking about it. So, I mean, you might want to think about that. Cliff Mesner with Mesner Development, he's a kind of an interesting guy. Kelly knows him.
Yeah.
And he stops into community. He'll stop into communities and talk about how you create a housing investment club. And he's really interesting, and he's got it all figured out. And at some point in time, I know he's working in Fremont right now, he'd be more than happy to come talk to a group of your folks and kind of tell you how you put that together. There's also some foundation dollars available. I'm hoping when this study is done that Kelly is able to tap into some foundations and, maybe get $100,000 from a foundation to match it locally across the county, some of the smaller communities like yourself, to have a bucket of money, of $50,000 to $60,000 to buy some older houses, knock them down, and it all takes process, it all takes effort. So
And how detrimental is it going to be to find a developer to come work with you when we're in a floodplain and we've just experienced the major flood?
I don't know if that was a 1,000-year flood or what that was. It was horrible.
It could be a 1 and 2 year flood.
Yeah, you never know, but let's hope not. And they'll work with you. I mean, these developers know how to stick things in the ground in all kinds of places. I was up in, I worked in Niobrara years ago, and they moved to town. That kind of dates me a little bit, but it's like, so there's a lot of that type of thing happening right now. And they just, if they know the lay of the land, they can do it, that sort of thing. So that, I don't see that as a big obstacle.
This is Bob again. In that process of looking at growth, and one of the things we've talked about is growing towards some of our sources of revenue. Casey's here in town, provides lots of sales tax. When Highway 30, when the bypass is finally completed, we're guessing that they're going to go north of town. And we can't annex farm ground. How do we start to plan strategically so that we can connect to those sources of sales tax revenue?
I've got to see the exact location. In my mind's eye, I got an idea of it, a pretty close idea of it, but I'm going to have to see exactly where that's at. I mean, I've worked in Geneva where they did the bypass, and numerous communities like that, and how you kind of tap into that and get those. Do you have a sales tax now? Do you have an LB 840, or what do you have?
No.
We have a full 1.5% sales tax currently now. We do not have LB 140. In that the expressway is going probably about right out 1 mile north of the north edge of town. So it's a significant distance.
Okay. Well, I mean, there's a variety of ways. I mean, first of all, is it within your planning jurisdiction?
Well, 1 mile. Well, if it's what our planning jurisdiction was 1 mile, so if it is 1 mile, it would be, yeah.
Well, that's important that it's in your planning jurisdiction, because then you can have some control on the land use and the zoning that's set up along there. And go ahead.
There are a couple businesses out north of town already.
Mhm.
There's a cabinetry business, metal shop, well drilling business. It's sort of a cluster just north of town, the first intersection north of town. So those businesses already exist out there. It's just that there's farm ground between us and them.
Brad's Bikes is out there.
Well, you can, if you own that land, you can annex it. I mean, and you can do in the state of Nebraska, you have a voluntary and involuntary annexation process, by law. So that land can be secured by somebody or an organization or a group of people that want to do something with it as opposed to farm it. Then you can go through an annexation process and kind of, do that whole, do what's necessary to get it annexed.
I know that's sort of outside the property that Alex is talking about is on the east side of town. This is on the north side of town.
Got it.
It'd be easier to connect going north, but I don't know about the building. What kind of parameters they're looking for to do the development, because this ground is low, it drains. A lot of other farmland around it, the water comes through that property. Going to be a downside. All the school property, the 27 acres we own now, drains that direction as well. So that's kind of problematic too.
You have a current comp plan, don't you? I was thinking you did.
Yeah, this is about 10 years old, Alex.
What's that?
Our current comprehensive plan, our comp plan.
Yeah, we're due to redo that. I don't know, it takes a little bit of money to get that done, so I'm not quite sure if we're in a position to do it right now, but we have been having discussions on that.
The annexation process, is that something the city would enter into, or?
Sure, the city has to be involved in it. You know, you have to write the necessary, annexation ordinances and that sort of thing. The tough part is when you try to annex and the person who land is being annexed doesn't want to be annexed. Then there's all kinds of issues associated with like that. But I mean, but if the land can be purchased by folks that want to be annexed and brought into the city and the city utility system and so on and so forth, then that's not an issue.
We just,
Getting the piece of land secured is important.
Pioneer Lake, and we just went through an annexation of Pioneer Lake, and I would say it was safe to say that 3/4 of those people out there didn't want to get annexed.
But I thought during that process, we learned that you can't just annex farm ground. It has to be developed first before you annex it. I thought that you can't annex rural ground.
Well, it's questionable, I mean, it has to fit the definition of developed and so on and so forth. But there's always, I saw an argument in one community, I think it was like Humboldt, where, they made the argument that it was going to be developed. It was purchased for development purposes. And so therefore, they didn't have any issues with it. And it's one of those kind of things like, who does it make a difference to if there's voluntary annexation? That's the other issue associated with it. So, I'm sure your attorney would have some comments about that. But you're thinking along the right track. I mean, you need land to do developments.
I'm gonna do some more reviews of the annexation at Pioneer.
It absolutely did, because there it wasn't exactly voluntary.
Right.
So that was probably a whole different ballgame, as if you had, what he's talking about. If you had, I'm gonna develop this, I want to develop this, I want this annexed.
Yeah.
A lot less
Oh, yeah.
fees
Cost,
involved in that, yeah.
time, emotion, the whole thing. But if it doesn't drain well, how do you go about that development process?
Every house or building is gonna have to be built up, 3 feet
Yeah.
or whatever it is.
Just
So
north
that-
of town out here is the lowest area
Oh,
in the
yeah.
area.
Every time we have a big
Everything
water
goes
sensor.
to there.
Exactly.
By that cell tower, right? Oh,
Yeah, when during the flood, you couldn't see those big tires on that truck, right, when he was going through there at that time. It was 5 feet deep, just north of the popcorn plant.
So in matter of economics, would it be better to consider the space east of town versus that sits so low?
Well, when I looked at that, some of the, obviously the through streets, right, was a big thing for me, creating square blocks. And so, I guess the other thing I thought about is traffic and Highway 79 and how it's just gonna get more and more and more and more, and so the kids then accessing the things that they all have to access. And so crossing Highway 79, I thought, if we're looking for a new development that prevent that from happening, because I just see a lot of families and a lot of kids. And so I automatically shifted my gears to the east side, just simply because from Highway 79 to the high school, I think there's one street that goes through. And then once you get beyond the high school, there's none. So, it makes it very hard to carry, so if you kind of get yourself going one way in and one way out, where, over here, you still can get on 79 to get out, and then Cemetery Road is already paved, and that'll have access to the expressway. So that area over there would be very easily accessed by those people living there to get on the expressway and get out of town. And every kid in that neighborhood could walk to the school, the pool, the parks, the daycare, the library without having to cross Highway 79. And it's also closer to our sewer plant. So I think for infrastructure, as far as utilities go, it's easier. And then 11th Street and Cemetery Road are already paved. 13th Street is this street right here that dead ends into the Boy Scout cabin. 13th Street is plotted to go straight through the cemetery road to this day. And so my thoughts is you start at 11th Street, you know, you gotta acquire that 40 acres, and 11th Street, you could sell them lots or get them divided out and get some infrastructure in there, and you can start in on 11th Street. As soon as those lots get going, you put 12th Street in, and 12th Street's gonna dead end into the grade school, and then 13th Street, this street here would be the last one that goes through. And then obviously the north-south streets that go through, there's 3 of them. So you'd create 9 blocks right there on the east side of the grade school park. And you've got already Cemetery Road, which is paved and will provide access onto the expressway. It really looks like a great area to me. I'm sure the farmer that farms it won't think so. But then that can just keep going north, right? I mean, that just runs right out to where Nathan lives, to the Mile Road. And so all that's just farm ground. And so those blocks, and I guess I'm a bit of a visionary. I like to think that, down the road, some of the decisions we're making now, would be looked back as good ones. And those blocks could just continue on. As our town needs to grow, so does our green space, right? And so our park can just continue north. We put a pedestrian crosswalk in 13th Street right up here, and the green ribbon just keeps flowing north. I would like to think the city would be visionaries enough that they would maybe include in a comprehensive plan for the future, a fairground to get our fair off our carnival off the street, a parking lot to get all the cars off the street during Old Settlers, and maybe room for a new city auditorium, which I'd like to think our town will get at some point. I know this is all a big picture, and I'm kind of got, maybe ran away with what we're talking about, but I put a lot of thought into that. And you could create 9 square blocks over there next to the grade school very, very, very easily.
Let me do me a favor.
I'm sorry?
And I can't see you on there, but that's okay.
I'm kind of sneaky that way. My name is Alex Legg. I'm a city councilman in North.
Alex, let me ask you this question. Do you have a pretty functional planning commission?
Yeah, I like to think we do, yeah.
Why don't you, in the next 2 weeks, have the planning commission kind of work up, mock it up with colored pencils or whatever, get a plat map of not only the community, which I'm sure you have, as well as the planning jurisdiction, the close, within a mile of the planning jurisdiction, and just sort of mock it up, for some growth areas, arrows pointed, this and that, and just kind of sit down with them and, and get it to me. And then, then it's crystal clear to me as to where you want to go with growth and so on and so forth. And what you might be talking about is 20 years, but still that's okay. We could include in the study itself kind of, instead of updating your comp plan, we'll just include kind of a future land use map. And if you think that's possible, say like over the next 2 weeks or so,
I think it's very possible.
have a little working session with your planning
I'll
committee.
probably need to talk to Treese to get a meeting of the planning commission. They only meet quarterly unless they have to. And so, but we can make that happen, I think.
Yeah, this is a have to. Just say, we're doing a housing study, and the consultant wants to see kind of a future land use map. So let's just, and I don't care what kind of shape it comes to us. I mean, we'll put it on the computer and, and fix it right. But it's just, you just want to make sure that, you have all your notes on there, extended green space, residential, single family, multifamily, just kind of mark something up and send it to us. One of the things I noticed driving through the community, I saw quite a few houses that appeared to me to be like on double lots. So is that true?
Yeah.
Kind of large lots, single family. And I don't know of any of those. I didn't look at plat maps to see if they were actually sitting in the middle of 2 lots or whatever the case may be. But that's always one of the potentials, to go to those folks and say, you don't like to garden anymore. So it's like, can we get that lot for, a duplex or something like that? I did notice that.
could jump in here. My name's Linda Emanuel, and I'm a registered nurse. I work in a community health nurse role with a national nonprofit. We deal with farmers and ranchers and their healthcare needs. I'm also a co-proprietor of our family farm. And so as I'm thinking and hearing all this discussion, a couple of things come to mind. And Alex, your green space, of course, I love. But if we could somehow put in some kind of a biking trail or an exercise trail that maybe someday could hook up with the Arboretum, that would be fabulous.
We've
It would be.
done that. The plan exists someplace
Mhm.
already.
That's a huge draw for young professionals to a community is a trail system.
I could see that. I could definitely see that.
Those things are all attractive to new families as well. You know, all that kind of stuff like that. All those kind of.
What about our infrastructure as far as the water treatment plant? Do we have capacity to add more?
I would think we could handle it, yes.
That would be something too with some of the stuff we've been reading about maintenance and stuff.
Mhm.
That's something that have to be probably on the front end because they're not going to want to they want to build and find out we don't have the capacity to deal with the wastewater.
Water plant is probably better situated than the sewer plant. But the sewer plant, we all know at the council that its life is gonna need to be,
Yeah.
have something done with it. So at that point, then that would be probably addressed.
Another attractive, that in my travels, because of my work, Airbnbs are very popular. And so if we could attract somebody to convert a home to an Airbnb, or a part of this planning is an Airbnb, that would be wonderful for our folks that come in from out of town for family events, weddings,
Yeah.
whatever it is.
Do we do contract work for a couple weeks?
Yes, yes. And the one we just stayed in Imperial, they took an older home, 1910, and created it to zero entry level, which was perfect to take my elderly parents out to visit. So those kinds of little niches, I know it's kind of pie in the sky right now, but those types of things are sure good things to have in your community.
That's a wonderful idea. Perfect. Fits in, you know, it's shelter. It could be, you know, it could be extended stay. It could be short term or whatever the case would be.
Just want to sit in town here and see what it's like to live here for a little bit, what their culture is like. And
Absolutely, oh, for sure. Do you guys have the capacity for downtown housing?
That's a good question.
Well, there's one building that someone actually started to turn into apartments on the second level. And then their idea, I think, was to do elderly apartments. Then they found out how much elevator cost to install and upkeep, and then that killed that project. There are existing a couple apartments, second-story apartments, and that are occupied. And there's a couple that aren't, like the old City Hall by the bowling alley is just sitting there, I think. I don't know what he's doing with that.
A gentleman bought that building and
Yeah, he's fixed it up with that. We did the story on it years ago. Yeah, that had a nice apartment here and a garage below, and no one's living there. I don't know how far he's gotten on that. And like I said, there's one building downtown that started turned into apartments and is frozen.
so do you have any advice for those people that start these projects like Nathan was just talking about, and then they just kind of go stale? Is it possible a committee could approach some of these people and somehow incentivize them, inspire them to maybe sell it or move ahead with it?
Sure. There again, it gets back to, you know, kind of a group with a potential, and that's one which is like a housing, like a local housing advisory committee to approach those folks and say, you know, what do you need to do to finish this project? You know, and so, you know, get the information that you need, and then work with Kelly and that organization to see what kind of monies. Again, everything costs money, and that's probably one of the reasons why they haven't finished it. But another reason would be kind of like, you know, not every idea is a good idea. Okay, so and they might get halfway through it and think it's not a good idea, but dollars potentially will, you know, assist in that process. I don't know. Do you use the tax increment financing downtown at all or anything like that?
I don't believe we ever have.
How much of the town is blighted?
I'm sorry.
Is your town blighted?
I don't believe so.
No.
It's some.
You're a second class city, right? Second class.
Yeah, yes.
So you're eligible to make 50% of your community a redevelopment area where you can use the tax increment financing carefully, I might add. You know, it's kind of like the last bucket that should be brought up to the table to make make a project doable or feasible. That's just kind of Tim's opinion. But to have that tool available, and I could, I've done like 200 of those, doing 2 in Lincoln right now, but it's like, I could kind of map out, once you send me that future land use map, I'll kind of map out where I think maybe that 50% should go. It should definitely include the downtown. It could also include some vacant areas and, for purchase of, using tax increment financing to put the infrastructure in, water and sewer for a little subdivision of one type or another. But it's a tool that you kind of need, but you got to be careful with it. Some communities are very conservative with it. Some are maybe perhaps too liberal with it, and you probably read about that. They did pass a new piece of legislation where you can do smaller areas for TIF, like 2 lots, that sort of thing. But it's got to be in that redevelopment area that I'm talking about. And Kelly can explain that as well, too. Linda, were you related to Denny? I knew Denny pretty well.
Danny Emmanuel?
Yeah.
I don't think so. I'm a transplant and I
Oh,
married.
really? There's like a ton of you Emmanuels around there, though, right?
Oh, yeah. there
Really
are.
North Bend Dodge name.
Yeah, so we were originally Webster areas where my husband's ancestors settled, so a little north of town.
Yeah, Denny Emmanuel he was an older gentleman. He passed away, but he was.
Denny Emmanuel.
Oh, Denny.
Denny Emmanuel.
Oh,
Yeah.
Denny, like Dennis.
Yeah, Dennis. I don't
Oh,
understand.
yes. When you said Denny, it threw me.
As I said, this was-
Dennis.
Yeah, so he would be like second relation down the line, kind of. Yeah, there's a bazillion of them, and a lot of them are males. So.
I knew Mike. Yeah, but I knew Dennis for a long time. We always called him Denny. And yeah, he's an old Cornhusker football player. Yeah,
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
you're that. Good guy. Really perfect, nice guy. All right. Anything else? What else you want to talk about? But think about that land use map. Just send me anything, just, roll it up, send it to us, or get it to Kelly. Kelly will get it to me. And we'll put it on the computer and put it together with, right colors and things of that nature. It's not a
I
problem.
do have a question about our population. You talked about that we're on an upgrowth. Were they able to see age-wise, were there greater areas that were potential for growth? Or where were the larger percentages of our ages?
I don't have that at my fingertips, but I do have that information. And it seems to me like you folks are getting a little younger in age, actually. Some younger people moving into the communities. Most communities that I work with, I mean, some of them have a median age of like 52, that sort of thing in Nebraska. But some others,
What's
like,
your capacity for growth for the school?
Not much.
Not much.
We talked about 25, maybe at the elementary was going to be the upper end before we need to look at a bond issue to actually add on.
Okay.
And that with Lincoln Premium Poultry and the potential for, some people coming in for that. We had that meeting, when I just first started a couple of years ago. So, yeah, but, I was just gonna say, says my son, he's 36, they just moved into town. Kid across the street's been there for 2 years, he's 26. His best friend just moved back to town, was living in Omaha, came out here because it was killing him on rent in Omaha. Finally found a house, shopped around for a long time. Kate and Courtney, my son and daughter-in-law, shopped around for a long time. They finally bought the house that they were renting. Just because they knew what they had when they bought it. With some of the other stuff. So a lot of it, I think, is those younger kind of startups. Amanda Grange, I know the student's name, Amanda Buddha, her husband, they bought a house over in and that's that, early 30s age class and younger. The kids that I'm seeing are recognizing they're moving to town. Although Tim and Karen live diagonal across the street from us, are retirement age there. They may be my age or a little bit older. But our neighborhood's really relatively young, for the new residents anyhow.
You talk about 25, maybe at the grade school. So our Western Hoe Trailer Park on the west end of town was purchased here a couple years ago. And we were notified at City Hall that within 3 years, there'll be 27 units he's gonna put in there. Now he's talking that there'll be units that he's gonna sell. But 27, trailer homes will be brought in there over the next 3 years.
Okay, that's good information.
That'll bring more than
If
25
they can get it
kids,
to
I bet.
25.
Well, that was what started the discussion. But how long ago has that been? It's been 3 years that it's been there, right?
2 weeks ago.
Oh, 2 weeks ago? Okay. We haven't heard that news yet.
How can you put 27 trailers in
I
there?
think there's 27 slits in there.
What?
Slots, yeah.
24, whatever he's gonna be. It's gonna be like 7, 7, 7, and then the fourth year, he'll bring in whatever.
Reach across it
is
to your
left.
neighbor's house.
I thought it was 20, I thought it was 24, so maybe it's 24.
I think it's in the 20s. That's what kind of prompted our discussion.
Getting back to that age
Units
distribution,
he's gonna sell, I've been told now, he's not gonna rent them, I think they'll finance you through them or something like that. I'm not sure how it's all gonna go in the end, but that's what kind of is coming to us.
while you folks were talking, I kind of pulled out a couple tables here. I didn't think I had it as close to my fingertips as I did. But your median age in the community is about 41.5 years, which, oh wow, that sounds like really old, but it's not. Some of your highest population groups are the 19 and under, and well, some of the younger groups, and lesser the senior citizens. So everything like 64 down, and under is pretty solid and maintains its. So you have good distribution in those age categories like that, 64 and younger. But yeah, your largest group is 19 and under. So you're a younger community. You really are. I mean, compared to, I work in communities, like I said, the median age is like 58 or something like that. So you're only 41.5. Scribner, for example, is around 56. So it's an older community. Nickerton's around 40.
Did you have anything to do with the city of Schuyler? Did you help them at all?
No, well, I have in the past. Over the years, I've worked there on doing different planning projects, but I'm trying to think who the primary developer was there. Kelly, do you know, was it Mesner did quite a few projects there?
Central City?
Mesner did help, yes.
Yeah.
Was kind of the lead developer for the north of town development. And then I know they also got some rural workforce housing dollars.
Yep.
That's what GFDC got as well for those apartment complexes.
And he's at Central City? is that
Yes,
correct?
yep,
Okay.
Mesner Development.
Yeah, I met him.
Yep, Cliff and Kathy Mesner,
Yeah. And now Schuyler also has a Schuyler Builders Group,
yes.
which is a group of businessmen that have kind of put together their money and built a house
Mhm.
and sold it and made a little, and then built another one, I think, and made a little more.
Yes, and I believe the school was a part of that.
Yeah.
And so they've worked with their construction students to build a couple houses. And then the school actually provides a stipend to some of their teachers to be able to rent the home or put a down payment on the home as well. And I think Cargill and the hospital might be involved in that too.
Mhm. That's great.
But good talking with you folks. Any other comments or anything? If you could get me a map in the next 2 to 3 weeks, I'd really appreciate it. Just something, scribbled up, sent to us to kind of show some growth areas and circle some areas for potential residential development. Because I'd kind of like your take on it rather than my guess at it.
I do like Alex's plan he sped out there is kind of very similar to something our economic development groups. I think it's the ideal spot, great spot. It's good to get ball on land. We talk about wanting to get further north for annexation purposes, maybe along the highway, maybe that they build a new fire department. They're wanting to build, they wanting to do that. They've been making noise about that. Maybe that goes north down that helps you.
Along the highway probably would be more zoned commercial or something more like that than residential.
Yeah.
That initial corridor probably would be zoned a little different than for residential too, you know. In hopes that something would
Yeah.
be done. with somebody.
Other comments or questions or anything?
If you really want to think forward, 14th Street will go all the way through, 15th Street will go all the way through, right? From 79 to, if you really want to look out there in the future. It'd be a cool neighborhood out there.
Others, we talk about housing adjacent spaces, like the corner there by Johnson's ground there, where you have the end of Cottonwood Street, yeah, and then it goes past the high school, like that area would be, again, you have the school there, and you have, I thought that's the next core, this is ideal better, but that would be the next thing that jumps into my mind, at least for a spot.
My whole thought of there was just kids walking to school.
Well, absolutely, in the
Deal with
park, and
79,
yeah,
and all that stuff.
Cemetery Road's got a lot of things going for it.
And yesterday, this big conversation I had with Ron Bowling, and the first thing he said is, boy, I'm sure concerned about the kids that come across the street. Boy, the traffic just flies into town. That was the first thing out of his mouth. As a concern he was letting me know about, as a councilman, the first thing out of his mouth when I walked through his door.
I always have talked about when they bring families that bring into town, the little kids that they have to be so alert to, and Tate just about hit one kid is on a bicycle and didn't take off the shirt.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, we appreciate your time.
Hey, thank you for your time. I know you folks are all busy, but any information you want to get to me, give it to Kelly. Kelly gets it to me immediately. It works real well that way. But we're going to be wrapping this up in about the next 5 to 6 weeks, and I'd like to have, any community that can help us out. I don't want to come in and do a land use plan for you. I want to see what your ideas are, so anything you can sort of mock up and send, give it to Kelly. I'd appreciate that. If I don't get something in a couple of weeks, I'll remind her to ask you folks if you've done that or not, because you guys have potential. You have good potential. And that's what you want to look at. But as we started, you need land to do that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Tim, for
Thank
your
you.
time.
Thank you.
Thanks.
See y'all later.
We're still on the Zoom call.
Nathan,